Okay, for the midterm, this first page is just basically a quick summary of everything we've done so far in one page. Very quick, short notes for your reflexive verbs. Let's start with, let's just go in order. Okay, for the Spanish 1 stuff that we went over at the beginning of the course, since we've spent time in Spanish 2, going over Spanish 1 review, and that will also be on your midterm. Present tense, you got another list of all your verbs. Same verbs from Spanish 1. Same verbs that you'll need to know meanings for present tense and preterite and everything else that you need to know meanings for. There are 15 irregular verbs that we went over yesterday as part of the review. They were ir, dar, querer, jugar, tener que, and tener together, saber, conocer, introducir, gustar, ver, hacer, poner, traer, salir, and then venir and tener all fall under the go verbs. So all the ones that we reviewed yesterday that we'll see some on the other part of the review. And then the present progressive, making sure you always use estar with a ing form of the verb, this actual verb that you'll need to know meaning for. So to say I am talking, you need the am form of estar because it's in progress, and then talking ing form. Then for your direct object pronouns, mete, lo, la, nos, los, and las. All of those are your direct object pronouns that you're going to replace the object of the sentence with. And the main thing to remember here is that it's receiving the action, not doing the action. If it was doing the action, it'd be your subject. So you're not looking at your subject at all for this. You're looking at your object of the sentence, which is usually found after the verb, which is receiving the action. Then once you replace it, you put it in front of the verb if it's one verb, or at the end of the second verb, attach it if it's two verbs. That same placement will occur with reflexives down at the bottom here, but for reflexives, it's a different usage. Here you have nothing to do with the subject. For reflexives, you do make it agree with the subject. Let's back up to stem changers in the present tense. The whole chart that you have, E to IE, E to I, and O to UE. Have to know the present tense of those, and then some of the preterite ones that we'll do in the basement. Those are all stem changing verbs, just in two different tenses. Okay. So for present tense, you've got the 3 kinds of changes. You always change the letter closest to the end. Inside the boot shape, which just means nosotros is out. And if it happens to be a shoe verb, then watch out for the O form, like deagle and seagull and ones like that.
For the term, are you going to give us what stem changer makes?
No, you'll have to know which makes. Then for your preterite, once we switch tenses, we switch endings, so you have to know the new endings with accents where they should be. Your cargar verbs that only change in the yo form to QUE, GUE, and CE, all with accents. Because the yo form has an accent, then make sure that you watch out for your cargar mixed in with your regular verbs. For preterite, continuing with things that change that are a little bit irregular, ir and ser share the same box, but then we also went over hacer, dar, and ver, which both use ER, IR endings with no accents. Every single one of these have no accents. Ver, however, is the one verb that you do have to worry about accents, extra accents that we called it kind of irregular. It's an I to Y change on the bottom too. We didn't call it a basement when we first talked about it, but you could look at it as a basement. Normally the basement verbs that we refer to are the E to I and O to U verbs that only change in the basement. That only happens though for verbs that end in IR in the preterite. So that's how you can kind of tell the difference between your basements that are stem changers and your basements that are I to Y. But again, basement just means it changes on the bottom 2 forms. We'll learn more I to Ys later. And in the reflexive part, we're going to do this section in present and preterite. When we learned it the first time, we just did it in the present tense, but it's the same thing in the preterite. The only thing you're changing are your endings. The me, te, se, nos, and se, your reflexive pronouns that you change if a verb ends in se, will be the same for present and preterite. Okay. So once you decide which correct one to use by looking at your subject, then you put it in front of the verb if it's one verb, or if it's two verbs, attach the correct one. It still has to agree with the right subject. Okay, so whatever the subject for the sentence is, make it agree whether you put it in front of the verb or if you attach it at the end of the verb. For this section, you'll know if you need to do it in present or preterite by your keywords that we're about to go over on your review sheet. So good? 10% of your grade. Alright, for your present tense endings, same endings that we've been using since Spanish 1. O está, amos, an. O es, hemos, imos, en. So that's for any regular verb. Remember, if you have two verbs in a row, you conjugate the first one. Don't conjugate the second one. That's what infinitive means. Okay. Then for irregular present tense, you have to just remember what's weird about it. For your verbs, ir and dar, I put them together right here. So ir is in this box, and then dar, I just put it together. So you see voy and doy are very similar. Vas and das, va, da, vamos, damos, van, dan. Then hacer in the present tense is just irregular in the yo form, just a go change. Saber is just the yo form. And then I listed the rest of them all up here for you to have your irregular verbs. Okay, so that's just a few of them. For gustar, remember that it's a weird verb that doesn't really, no other verb that we've talked about so far does the same thing. Where the beginning part, the mete, le, nos, and les, agrees with the beginning, the subject. And then the gusta or gustan, the reason why it's only two choices is because once you make this agree, you're not going to conjugate the verb or what's left over. You're going to use gusta if you like one thing, so you're going to look after the verb. If you like one thing, then it's gusta. If you like plural things, then it's gustan. For present tense, ser and estar, your boxes, obviously you need to know what the conjugations are so that you can use your right form of the verb once you figure out what the sentence is saying. So, soy, eres, es, somos, son, estoy, estás, está, estamos, están. Make sure that you have the right accents where they should be. But then your reasons for using each verb is where you have to make sure not always doing a permanent temporary distinction, but making sure you go through your different uses. And then I put a bunch of clues here too. Why would de always be a clue for ser?
Because it's a fact.
It could be. What does de mean? Of or from, you're speaking of something. So if you're talking about nationality or origin, that's where you usually use the words of or from. You can also use it with possession, which are all reasons for ser. Okay. Why would en or any location or position words be estar clues or reasons? Because you're talking about location, where something is. Good. Okay. So place is one acronym for estar. Location, emotion, temporary, let is your second acronym there. You could do either or for estar. And remember that we use estar with present progressive, which is the next section. So action, something being in progress, the ing form is what you use to form, making sure that you have a form of estar that's conjugated to agree with your verb, and the ing form, ando or iendo, based on your verb being AR or IR. This is just a note for you that it does have a change sometimes. We're not going to worry about that because we don't run into that too often. Those are just kind of exceptions, things that change the spelling of a verb. Alright, then direct object pronouns. For the DOPs, this is the section we always get stuck on. Your direct object pronouns, me, te, lo, la, nos, los, and las, are used to replace Replace is a key word to remember, and receive is a key word to remember, because you look at the object of the sentence that is receiving the action. You want nothing to do with your subject for direct object pronouns. Your subject does the action. We're not looking at what does the action, we're looking at what receives the action. So what receives the action is the object of the sentence. Once you take the object, you replace it with one of these. And then what do you do with it? Put it in front of the verb. If it's one verb, or the verb. If you have two verbs, attach it at the end. So if you have two verbs here, you see it attached at the end that replace that. Don't put los dientes again. You're taking it away. It goes away. If you have one verb, you're going to put it before the verb. And if the verb happens to be reflexive, which it does in this case, the reflexive is going to come first, then the direct object pronoun, then your verb. And your verb always agrees with what? Right. So your verb being conjugated, that's what it means. Always agrees with your subject. Then stem changers in the present tense. Just have to remember your O to UE, E to IE, and E to I verbs. There's just several different examples of them. Remember that you only change stem changing verbs in the present tense. You always change them in the boot shape, which means that the nosotros form is out. When we do stem changers in the preterite, that's where they change in the basement or bottom two only. We'll come back to any of these in a moment if we need to. Just want to make sure we get through all this. For your preterite verbs, make sure you've got your regular endings with accents where they should have it. Always on the O form and LAO stead form for any regular verb. So there's 3 examples of regular verbs. Here's an example of a kad, gad, and zad that only change in the O form. Again, we'll come back and do this. Then the irregular preterite, fui, fuiste, fue, fuimos, fueron, then dar and ver all use ER, IR endings with no accents. Hacer is the weird hice, hiciste, hizo, hicimos, hicieron. Then for your basement, you've got O to U and E to I. Only the basement, only bottom two, only for verbs that end in IR. The reflexive is the tricky part where you have to know these key words right here. To know if the sentence has the key word for yesterday, you're going to do the preterite ending, not the present tense ending for these. If you want to copy it down, and then I'll write your past your next class, you can. Please study these packets.